LGBTQ plus youth are almost 5 times as likely to attempt suicide and are significantly more likely to struggle with substance use. These are not just statistics. They are urgent calls to action. So we ask you, for the next few minutes, please just put aside politics, religion, and personal beliefs about right and wrong, and imagine the first time you held your child, the overwhelming joy that you felt, and the promise of unconditional love. It's that support that can be their shield when facing the unique challenges that LGBTQ kids have. I'm Jody Sweeten, your host for Awkward Conversations, where each week we provide parents with practical advice on how to raise happy, healthy, substance-free kids who are empowered to make smart choices. In this episode, we will discuss how you can support your LGBTQ child. We understand it can be daunting and even scary, so our experts will also offer the support you need to be able to fulfill that promise of unconditional love. And before you think this doesn't apply to you, remember, fostering empathy and teaching acceptance helps all children develop resilience and emotional intelligence, 2 very powerful tools that they will need to make smart, healthy choices throughout their lives. I would like to welcome everyone to today's show. Thank you so much.
God, that intro. I was crying already. The unconditional love. This is how we're starting out?
Yeah. Yeah, we want to remind people that, that their kids need them, no matter what.
Yeah, your kids always need you. We adopted our foster kid, my husband and I, when he was 5 years old. And everybody wants a baby. And when we met our kid at Child Protection Services, he was 5 years old, and I went, this is a baby. Mm-hmm. This is when you're 5 years old, you still need your mom or you still need your dad. And when I remember one of the workshops we went to, one of the foster adoption workshops we went to, there was a 17-year-old girl going away to college. And she said, I still want to be adopted. And people were like, why do you still want to be adopted? And she goes, I'm going away to college. Don't you think I'd want someplace to return to at Thanksgiving or Christmas, go back to a family that I feel I belong to, a place I belong, a community that loves me?
Absolutely.
So I've already completely taken over the conversation.
No, it's okay. No, you know what?
That's my time. I'm leaving.
That's right. Let me go back and introduce our guests first, because we have some incredible guests today. Our first guest is Mel Brown, who is a specialist in working with gender-expansive children and their families. Mel, thank you so much for joining us today. We are really happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here.
And then also we have my dear and wonderful friend, Alec Mapa.
That's me.
That's you. Alec, you do so much work within the LGBTQ community, within the substance abuse community, within the adoption community. There's just so many things that you have personal experience about that you are so open and willing to talk about. So I'm really excited to have you on as a guest today.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I was told there was going to be a goodie bag of some kind with merchandise.
There will. It's my undying love and devotion.
And a bathrobe.
Swag. Yeah, but Alec, I would love to hear a little bit about some of your advocacy work that you do, because it is so important to the community.
I did a lot of work with Family Equality. Family Equality is the organization that helped us get marriage equality. They lobbied a lot on Capitol Hill, and Family Equality came about, and they said, this is what our families look like. It's not that different from yours. We have kids, and getting the word out and presenting ourselves and showing our relationships and showing our kids and showing our humanity eased a lot of the prejudice that was happening during marriage equality, which is why the work you're doing in advocacy for these differently gendered kids or kids who are expressing gender in different ways is so important, because it widens the expanse of who belongs. But this goes back, my advocacy goes way back as to the 80s when everybody was dying of AIDS, and then it went into the 90s when they were trying to keep people from serving in the military, and then into marriage equality. So as an LGBTQ person, my advocacy and my activism is just, it never ends.
Yeah. And you're also a parent.
And I'm also a parent. They say each generation's job is to make the generation before go, what the hell is happening? And that's what this generation has done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's made us rethink a lot of things.
A lot of things.
The name of the show, obviously, is Awkward Conversations, and we know that there are probably a lot of parents out there that find the topics of gender and sexuality and all of those things awkward and uncomfortable, and I'm sure there are plenty of kids out there. The last thing you want to do is talk to your parents about some of this stuff. We were talking earlier, before the show started, about the importance of chosen family. I would love to hear, what are some of the things that you see families of LGBTQ youth dealing with and struggling with, and how can we help?
I'm going to answer many questions with it depends, because it really depends on where the child is in their exploration, how the parents feel about it, or the caregivers feel themselves around in the verbiage that they have or don't have. And so there's always a lot of fear. There's a lot of society itself shows all these things that are trans kids have a high incidence of substance abuse. And no, it's because it's not their transness that increases their risk. It's their bumping up against society that is transphobic and homophobic that then increases their risk. And so when parents come in, there's a lot of fear. And so what I try to do is hold that for them. But I also talk about, first thing, who are your people? Where is your community? And if that is not established for the child and also the parents, that's the first thing we need to talk about is, who can you talk to? Because what I don't want the parents to do is share their feelings of unease with their child. They can share it with me, they can share it with another adult and someone else, but let's not invalidate this child's experience. And that's the first thing that I think is really important.
Yes.
You just messed me up with that one.
Yeah.
Just the empathy, because the value in that is you're mirroring back. Well, are you mirroring back judgment,
That's
or are you
right.
mirroring back unconditional acceptance and love
That's
for
right.
your kid?
Right.
And I also want to hold space for those parents who aren't ready, because that's valid.
Right.
I don't have parents coming in jumping for joy that their child is trans. They're terrified because they don't know anything about it.
Right. And either they don't know anything about it, or what they do know is that the world is going to be incredibly hard and unkind on their child, and that is its own kind of fear as a parent. Even if you're completely supportive of your child as they are and who they are, the fear that the world might not be is something that can be really scary. And what we want to do on this show is really talk about how to help kids and families who are walking through the experience of either coming out as LGBTQ or exploring that, but also how we help families raise allies of LGBTQ youth. Allies that will stand up and say, that's not how you talk to my friend at school.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not how you treat somebody, and how we get that to spread like wildfire.
To be the
Absolutely.
predominant culture.
Right.
And it's like what you were saying earlier, that sense of community is what makes the child feel safe. The kids need safe spaces where they feel they can express themselves and be safe and not be mocked and not be judged. And that speaks to the suicidality of these kids and the substance abuse problems of these kids, because when they feel anxious, when they feel unsafe, my son had a best friend who is a trans girl who experiences a great deal of anxiety and she has accepting parents. And I said, what are the anxieties what are her major anxieties? She goes, her anxiety isn't about her parents' acceptance, it's about living in the larger world.
That's right.
As a trans person.
Right.
I'm accepted in this very limited environment, these four walls. I have people who love me, but am I going to be able to recreate that in the world beyond? And I think a lot of my drug use, I can be pretty frank about it, as a queer teenager, came from that feeling of I wasn't accepted by my parents. I did not have a safe space that I could exist in, and I felt vulnerable a lot of the time. My drug use was about not feeling vulnerable, to escape that feeling of fear and vulnerability. Yeah.
It's a coping strategy.
Yeah.
And we want a coping strategy to be healthier. There needs to be a community that people come and can be whoever they are in that space.
We have to speak to this generation. This is a very anxious generation.
Yeah.
Because they've grown up with social media, they've grown up with screens, and I think that's given them this whole other idea of who they're supposed to be. And if I don't line up with this community, if I don't even match the pictures that I'm posting myself, that creates anxiety.
And let's not forget that we are still re-entering post-COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And how to socialize and reintegrate. And some of my clients, their happy place was at school with their friends, and now they're stuck at home with their family that does not accept them, and they can't be who they want to be.
Right.
I think we're also coming out of that era too, and we have to manage that.
Yeah, I'm finding that sense of community is so important for young people in general. It's what helps them find themselves, find who they are, get through struggles, all of these things, but even more so for LGBTQ youth to really find those people where they can 100% be authentically themselves or even explore who they want that self to be. I think we also, and I'm sure you see this a lot in your practice, is having that conversation that this is not an end point. This is just a beginning of who this person is going to be. How can families help?
In terms of families separately, I think it's about, and if I get too jargony, please just stop me, but mirroring something, right? So in my practice, I really want to validate, normalize all of the things that people feel anxious about or have shame around, right? That's who you are inside. Okay. Beautiful. Really? So being able to mirror that is really important. And for parents, they need to have a space outside that maybe other parents that have gone through it at different levels, they're at different spaces. They can have those conversations. I'm really scared because blah, blah, blah. I don't know where to buy my kid a bathing suit now because I don't have those resources. So sharing those resources is really important. So there's some transitioning family like groups that I will first say, you probably need to speak to other parents that are going through this, that have gone through this, and those are online, and do that separately from your child too. That's really important.
And educate yourself.
Yeah. And we will get those resources from you as well, and definitely include them in the show notes, because I know that is something that a lot of parents and families are out there looking for.
Right. And also even like bibliotherapy, if you don't have the words of how around gender and sexuality, and remember, those are two different things. I think society ties those things closely together, and we need to start separating. A gender identity is very different than someone's sexuality. And reading books, Sex is a Funny Word is a great book.
Oh, I had that. That was the book I think I gave to my kids when we were discussing a lot of stuff, was that one. Yeah.
And it's good. And you can pause and say, what do you think about this? Where you don't have the words for it, but you can utilize books to start those conversations. And it's a helpful, because parents don't have all the answers.
Right. Yeah.
Like mic drop, right?
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, you're going to mess up and
also,
you don't know.
Yeah, it's also important to say that. I
That's
don't
right.
know, but I love
know.
you,
That's
and
right.
let's take this journey together, and let's unpack this together. As a queer parent, every year I'd vacation with other queer parents with our family that Rosie O'Donnell started back in the day, where other LGBTQ parents could get together with other parents and our kids and all go on a vacation together to a Club Med or on a cruise. And so I've seen the kids grow up together.
Yeah.
And we don't all have queer kids. Some come out straight, and the straight kids or all the kids become the safe place for the other queer kids in school.
Yeah.
They become the safe place. And also, we grow up with little kids explaining to them all this stuff from a very young age. And so we had language early on as parents, explaining gender to a child. Okay, let's say you were peanut butter. You're made out of peanut butter. Let's just say you were a jar of peanut butter, but you were in a grape jelly glass. And it said on the thing on the outside, grape jelly, and everybody treated you as grape jelly and would open you up and go, oh, what's this? What are you? And they said, what if you, so a lot of differently gendered people are just in the wrong jar, and they want to be in the right jar and addressed as that thing. And they're like, oh, is this the gender thing again? You don't have to do the peanut butter thing.
Right.
Like the kids were like savvier than,
Well,
we gave them credit for.
Yeah. And again, it comes down to having those conversations and having those age-appropriate conversations. No one is asking you to talk to your 15-year-old kids the same way that you would talk to your 3-year-olds. They're very different conversations.
And I think parents need to understand that it's okay if your kids leapfrog you. You don't have to have all the answers. And let's be uncomfortable with the fact that you don't know, and your child might be teaching you something that you don't have the knowledge for. And so I think that's also hard for parents these days.
It's the vulnerability.
They need to be like in charge. Yeah, it's the vulnerability.
It's vulnerability. I think when you, as a parent, it's scary not to know all the answers.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about parents who feel like they don't really get it, or they can't really get a grasp on this, and like how to manage that. I think something I find a lot is I'll have conversations with families and parents, and they'll say, again, I don't get it. It's hard. I don't accept it. It's not something that is within my religion or different things. And I'll say, do you think that these young people or your child deserve to feel like they shouldn't be alive, or that they're contemplating suicide? And so often the person will say, Of course not. Of course, I don't think that I don't want my child to die. I don't want other children to die. And I think sometimes bringing it back to you have to start somewhere before that, before somebody gets to the place. And we've talked already about this acceptance and understanding.
And the knowledge that not everyone, like you said, there are kids that have grown up with queer families and who have the language and the understanding and the knowledge because they've been exposed to it and been around it. But the families that don't, how do we let them know it's okay if you're not there yet, but it's a journey? What are some of the things that we can remind parents are really what's at stake and what the important thing is? And the important thing is not whether or not you're comfortable as a parent, but it's whether or not your child is alive.
Supported.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain to people, to be empathetic to an experience that they're not experiencing. As parents, we have to empathize with stuff we don't understand all the time. Where is this coming from? Why are you acting like this? This isn't the world we grew up in. Just as the world we grew up in wasn't the world that our parents grew up in. Each generation has to evolve to a certain understanding politically and environmentally that's radically different from the generation before.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you break that down to people who are new to this experience? How do you make them empathize with something that's completely radically different from who they are?
Different ways, and what I try to get into is what's really happening, because it's what are we really talking about here and what are we really afraid of. So the first thing is if a parent or parents or caregiver come to bring their child to therapy, that's actually a great step, right? So we were talking about this, that's a little bit of a bubble too, that they're even allowing this child to seek help and that they're seeking help in some way. So that's great. It's the first thing. It's a great job that you're here and thank you for being here. You're already a great parent. That's number one. And also, we talk about the risk factors with kids when parents don't support them. And so what I always say is that I don't know where this journey is going to go for the parents or the kids, but I do know that if parents, or if they don't have a supportive structure around them, and that includes the parents, supporting their journey, that there is absolutely an increased risk of suicidality, suicide ideation, drug abuse, risky behavior, self-harm, and it's really about talking about what will happen most likely if this isn't, if you can't support in some way or find them support. You don't have to do it, but at the very least find them some support.
We don't know what the journey might look like for them, but we do know what will happen if they don't have a community and support.
Yeah. It's just, first of all, I love your cadence. And I love the way you talk. If you're listening to this, you can't see like how empathetic your eyes are, and you have an immediate thing of pulling people at ease. I'm an agent of chaos, so I come into a room and it's a tornado. But when you speak about the consequences of not supporting your kid, it's, as a member of the queer community, it's littered with the carcasses of people who have indulged in risky behavior, who have indulged in substance abuse, all because they have religious trauma. They have the trauma of not being accepted by their parents. They have the trauma of being rejected by their primary caregivers. There are a lot of LGBTQ youth on the streets who have been rejected by their parents. It's that thing of hurt people, you know? And if you send a hurt kid out into the world, if you send a suffering kid out into the world, it just creates more suffering for them and their communities.
And also, I think we touched a little bit on it in the beginning, but talking about that hurt people and that idea of empathy, everyone needs to have empathy. And it's so key in helping us to broaden our worldview and say, you know what, I might not experience this, but but I know it must be painful for someone else. And the important part is to remember that it's the empathy of children who aren't maybe in the LGBTQ community that we really need to also emphasize, because the issue is the isolation, the loneliness, the bullying.
There's also hurt people hurting themselves and internalizing that pain. And one of the ways that we see people who are hurting, they internalize that inside, and this is a group of people who often are being mistreated at school by their peer group, sometimes not accepted at home, and unfortunately substance use and finding that relief and finding that emotional kind of coping is a critical part of that, unfortunately.
Right.
But I think it's like also when you said empathy, we want to raise empathetic kids. What does that look like? My favorite niece, I think she's 13 now, it has Down syndrome and grew up in an integrated classroom. Meaning for the first 5 years of her education, kindergarten through like maybe 4th grade, was part of the classroom. And it's a new model because usually it was special ed was the model.
Right.
That we shuffle the
Separate
kids
them.
off to special ed. The kids who grow up with Abby, my niece, in the classroom have a more expansive worldview
Right.
and have more empathy for her and would accommodate her. And it brought out such kindness in them.
Yeah.
And those kids in that classroom, because of that culture, if Abby would face any kind of negative interaction on the schoolyard, the other kids in that class would stand up for her.
Yes.
That's my classmate. That's my sibling. That's my.
Yep.
They treated them like family. And so, if you take that kind of empathy and translate it to all, like, we're part of this diverse ecosystem as human beings. Everything that touches me touches you. We breathe the same air. We drink the same water. Let's not screw that up for each other. Let's make this a world where everything works for everybody. And I think that's a really
it's
hard thing
enough.
to do.
It is hard enough. It's hard enough if you are a cisgender, heteronormative, all of
I
those.
say straight, not narrow.
Yeah, exactly. If you fit into all of those check boxes, life is still it ain't easy.
Yes.
And anyone outside of that, I want us to really understand that the isolation and the treatment of people in marginalized communities from those outside of it is really where the problem lies.
And I also think that's why representation is so important, because you don't know if you don't know. Right? And so that segregation of special ed and all of those things where let's just put these kids somewhere else, it doesn't do anyone any good. It's about integrating so that you can have those awkward conversations amongst yourselves, because this is someone different and I need to ask questions about it.
You're watching Awkward Conversations Season 4.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Welcome back to Awkward Conversations Season 4. One thing I do want to touch on, and Alec, I'm sure you can speak to this too, is that substances within the LGBT community are also, a lot of the communal spaces are bars. Or it's a lot, bars, parties, circuit party, that sort of environment where substance use is really prevalent. And how do we help support our new baby LGBTQ family
Our gabies?
Our gabies. How do we help them find that sense of community and connection that isn't also at a detriment to themselves and their well-being? And I think, I would say probably even, I remember in the 80s, anyone that you knew who was queer and hadn't come out yet, they just went to the bar.
Yeah.
And how many people do we know that aren't here now? How do we help separate those two things so one doesn't have to be intrinsically tied into the other?
That's a really great question. I can only speak to my own experience of growing up in a very religious household that did not support me, and not being able to talk about my parents made me feel very isolated and made me feel, and this is in the 80s, so I'm coming out at a time where people are dying, sex is dangerous. I need a lot of things explained to me in a way that I could understand, and I don't have that. I had to educate myself a lot on my own, made a lot of mistakes. I've been sober for 3 or 4 years now, just like getting to a point where I understand my own pain.
Right.
I think that there was nobody at my age when I was growing up who would have the age-appropriate conversation about where I'm at right now. I'm in so much pain. I'm so afraid of losing you. I'm so afraid of losing friends. I'm so afraid if I'm myself, I won't belong anywhere. And that made me not want to feel any of that fear. So I drank a lot at NYU. A big drinker, and we all did. And that was the community. And then what happens is we're like bumper cars. We'll mess up, we'll get all dented and messed up, and then we'll figure it out. Right. But we could have all saved ourselves a lot of trouble. You have to address, why are you medicating in the first place? Why are you coping with a substance in the first place? Because there were no coping mechanisms put forth to us, which is why this kind of education and empathy is so essential. Before we go down this road, let's talk about where you're at right now.
I think there's also like an intersection to be thought about here around the time identity-wise that people are often coming out or kind of exploring their sexuality and their sexual identity and all of these things coincides also with a time that their brain is particularly vulnerable to substance use and substance use exposure.
Not a frontal lobe to be found.
Not a developed one anyway.
Not a developed frontal lobe, just a giant, what is it, a giant amygdala at the time, just all emotions.
I started smoking pot at 14. No frontal lobe developed there. You know? When does it close up? Like you're 20, 25?
Yeah. So you've got like almost 10 years there.
Yeah.
So these young people, I find often are, like you were describing, you don't necessarily have the skills. No one is maybe modeling for you, how do I cope with this experience of who I am as a person, what my identity is. And so you find substances and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I feel relief.
I feel relief.
Good.
I feel nothing.
I feel escape. I feel nothing. Mm-hmm. And your brain gets exposed to that over and over again because you seek that over, and it makes you at a higher risk for developing a long-term substance use condition. Right. And it's just so sad to think that kids who are already struggling and having these difficulties then now have this additional struggle.
Right. And it's not just LGBTQ kids, it's all kids. Any kid who's met with anxiety. Yep. I feel like if you're having the drug conversation at 14, it's too late.
Well, we talk about that all the time. That really, you have to start preschool, 4 or 5.
You have to start age appropriate. Yep. These are substances. This is what it does to your brain. This is your body. This is how it works. We sent our kid to a class in consent when he was 9 years old. And the way they explained consent to that kid, my kid, it was so incredible. He came to the breakfast table and he's, okay, I'm going to make a fist and I want you to get me to open it. So I said, open it. And he wouldn't open it. And I started prying it open. He wouldn't open it. And I was like, I give up. He goes, okay, all those things that you wanted me to do were about what you wanted. Ooh. Whether or not I open my fist is up to me, and that's consent.
Yes.
And I was like, that was so simple.
Yeah.
It was so simple. And I might decide to open it. I might decide to close it. But classes went beyond that. They said how other people dress is not consent for you to say something or to comment. How other people look does not give you consent to comment on them or bully them. It's like, it's about the sovereignty of who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And it's about learning to honor and accept or find that path to acceptance. You know, again, we're not asking families and parents who maybe have no experience in this world to just be right on board and at the Pride Parade.
Right.
But what we're asking is that you don't close that door on your child and you keep it open and you're willing to go on this journey with them because they are going to need you.
One of the things that we are advocating for at our school is Rainbow Club. And anyone can join. It's not just for a kid that identifies as LGBTQ+. It's for everyone who feels different. And that is something that I think anyone can connect to, is when has been a time that you feel different, or when do you want to learn more about this, right? And I think that's a good starting point, especially at the school. It's a private space. There are no parents that are allowed. It's within, the teachers are there, and there's books that we read, and it's all part of diversity and equity, talking about different families. And so it's about building that empathy, and that's a good starting point too, is through the schools, if you can.
Absolutely. I remember in high school, the Gay Straight Alliance Club, and that was
that's
like
still alive and
still
kicking.
very much alive.
Back
and
then
kicking.
we called it Drama Club.
Right, we were just the theater
theater.
kids. But no, and even more and more of these, there are clubs, there are resources, there are things, that spaces that kids can find, LGBTQ youth and others, that are substance free. But, it really it's the external forces. Let's say now we have a parent who is on board and willing to go on this journey with their kid, and they're like, okay, we can do this. What's the next hurdles that they're going to face? They might be, like you were talking about, accepted and loved within those four walls, but the world at large. How do parents now take that little nest that they've built, and how do they expand it to the world at large?
Yeah, and I think that's the scary thing for parents, is I didn't sign up to be an ally. I don't know how to advocate for my child. I feel embarrassed when I'm in a supermarket and someone comes up to my child who hasn't transitioned but wants to wear a dress, and I'm the one that needs to explain myself. So it's about really talking to the parents about and giving them tools of, and I do a lot of role play, different from cosplay, but role play. I'm open to that too. Everything's therapeutic. There's a lot of role playing those conversations so that you can be an advocate for your child. How about going to the doctor? This is going to be a really interesting trip. So are you at a doctor's office that they will use the correct pronouns, that the nurses are aware and sensitive to gender expansiveness? And also, do you know how to advocate for your child, preparing them for a physical that might be really uncomfortable? So it's about having all of those conversations that parents aren't yet ready for, and just the more prepared they are, the more confident they feel about it, and then they can go out into the world and help advocate for their kids.
And I would say also one of the best places to start asking questions and learning about resources and where you can advocate our pediatrician's office.
Absolutely.
Particularly ones that are very gender expansive, inclusive, and wanting to work with parents.
And if you find that yours isn't open to that conversation, then there must and there are other pediatricians out there, and you don't have to stay with one that cannot support you and your child.
I have pre-called offices and said, hey, there is a child that identifies as gender expansive. How is your office with, are they gender affirming? Where do you have patients that identify as gender queer, gender expansive in any way? I will do that for my clients ahead of time so they can feel confident that they're going into a situation that feels safe.
So last season, we talked a little bit about how finding a therapist can be difficult. And I kind of joke sometimes that you have to kiss a few frogs or therapy frogs to find your prince, princess, or royal kind of therapist. Not that you're kissing your therapist, of course, to be clear.
Yeah, so that would be not good. Move on from that therapist.
Yeah, definitely don't do that. But I think the same applies here with whether it's physicians, whether it's music teachers, sports coaches. Like sometimes you have to prepare yourself as a parent to go through that process of vetting these professionals who can be supportive to your child.
Yeah, it's a relationship just like anything else. And I always I put my kiddos, if I'm working with kids, teens, parents, families, in the driver's seat. That's the first thing I say. I was like, if this isn't working for you, that's fine. And actually that's a good thing to start from, because if someone else needs you to be in therapy with them, then that's a red flag. So you have choice. You have consent to say this works or this doesn't work. And so I think it's also a model for just relationships in general, to say no to things that don't feel right. This isn't a good fit. And so I think that having those conversations and saying, you can wait and see. You can say, I'm vetting other people and this is what I want. And how do you operate? What is therapy in your practice? Put them in the driver's seat of interviewing you and seeing if that's something that works.
Sometimes we get to a point where confrontation is hard, of course, like it's scary, but sometimes being able to say, I'm not sure if this is working, and here are some of my concerns, and seeing how that person can respond to your concerns is really a great way to be like, are you the right fit?
You have to do it when you're dating people. You have to do it when you're in therapy, because you are divulging all yourself and you're asking another human being for guidance and resources, and you want to be sure that you're asking the right one.
Absolutely.
You said something earlier that I think really speaks to a lot of the feeling of being overwhelmed, is that you have to remember that it's the start of a journey. It's not like when you talked about the parents coming in so afraid. I think that if all the concerned parties have a willingness, like you said, like just showing up, willingness. We say in program, there was never anything I surrendered to God that didn't have my claw marks all over it. So it's that willingness that kind of helps us move forward. It's the equivalent of handing somebody a calculus book and going, become an expert on this today. And that's not going to happen. I may never understand that, but I can learn to love it, accept you as somebody who does understand this. And you can help me understand it.
I can learn to ask questions.
Yeah, I can learn to ask questions.
And I can learn to support your love of calculus or whatever it might be. One thing I would really love to make sure that we have for parents are resources and places, websites, organizations that they can look for. And we always put all of that information in the show notes so that parents can find it easily. Alec, Mel, do you guys have any resources or or places that you have found to be especially helpful for families and youth navigating the LGBTQ?
There's so many. So feel free to reach out. I am happy to share resources, but I'm affiliate with the Los Angeles Gender Center. And so there are some resources that we as a collective share and vet. So you can always go to lagendercenter.org. I like PFLAG. I think I think it's a really
national.
great, and it's national, and
It's
so I really
national.
like that.
They work a lot in suicide prevention and the prevention of substance abuse.
I like them a lot, and there's a lot of good resources, and again, because it's all over the country, that's really helpful. Also, there's an organization called Gender Spectrum, and they actually have one of the things on their website is talking points. So how would you write a letter to a family member and saying our child is trans and this is what is okay with us and not okay? Like, how would you write that letter? Where would you even begin? How would you have a conversation with the grandparents? Like, all those things. And so there are some resources that have a roadmap for that in lots of different ways, allyship and such. So that's a good resource too.
Great.
All of the links for these resources, of course, will be in the show notes for folks to access.
And read books. There's so many good books out there.
Do you have your top 2 book recommendations that you would recommend to families just starting this journey?
Right now, so Rachel Pepper is an author, and she just came out with a book recently called The Transgender Child. It talks about experience with parents too. I love the Gender Quest workbook, which is something that parents can go through with their child too, and just actually give it to their child if they are just exploring. The Gender Creative Child is great. Dr. Erin Saft, who's at UCSF, she's amazing, and she's one of my heroes and mentor.
Fantastic.
I think as we discuss this today, it might be helpful for parents to think about, like, where is the line between kind of normal childhood development and, like, where is the point where they might want to consider getting some support for themselves or for their child as they are on this journey or considering kind of their identity in different ways.
Yeah, I think a talking point that's been around, is it a trend? When is it gonna, how do I know? How did they know? And
Is it a phase?
Yeah, is
I
it
hear
a
a lot.
phase? A phase generally will be at 6 months. If it's beyond 6 months and your kid is clear and continuing to tell you things that they're feeling, it's time to listen.
Okay, great, wonderful.
Great. Any last thoughts, Alec, on anything that you would want parents out there who are listening to this to know and be able to relate to their kids?
Just put yourself in their place. If you've ever felt not loved or accepted in your life, try to remember how that feels. You don't have to be a queer person to have experienced somebody shutting you out,
Right.
or a friend no longer speaking to you, or to be ostracized by a community, or to be afraid or to feel vulnerable. Just put yourself in their place.
Great.
I also think let's try not to choose fear. Let's try to choose love, because that's really what it is about. And I think that fear, that's what's breeding a lot of hatred and misunderstanding and misinformation. And so let's try to shift, because even parents who aren't there yet, we love them too. They're in there, they're exactly where they need to be. And so let's choose that.
I just want all the parents out there to know that there is no judgment. We just want you to be able to take this journey with your kid and support them and love them like every kid and every human being deserves.
That's right.
We all need love, we all need support, we all need community, and we all need to have conversations with each other, whether they're awkward or as lovely as this conversation was.
Gay as possible.
Which this was
It wasn't as awkward as I thought it was going to be.
No, you did come close. So that was helpful. I appreciate that. No, but thank you guys so much for joining this. This is such an incredibly important conversation, and I just am so honored that we got to have it, and I hope that it really helps someone out there on this journey.
I know it will. It will.
Absolutely. That's all for now. Tune in next week for more of Awkward Conversations Season 4. I know as a parent, one of the things that terrifies me is the lack of practice that really is required to get your license.
When we think about careers or professions, in order to become a manicurist in most states, you need over 1,000 hours of practice. To become a licensed barber in many parts of the country, you need 5,000 hours. But in most states, in order to get that piece of plastic that says you're licensed to drive, You need 50 or less. And you start to build up the risky decisions that young people make. Alcohol with cannabis, with speed. You can see how this doesn't become an A plus B equals C. It becomes an A to the fourth times B to the sixth, which can result in lots of horrendous and catastrophic results. We forget that driving is an art and a science. Because as much as we want to be good coaches to our young people, there's no guidebook on how to teach your kid how to drive. So some great resources out there that, again, leverage technology to develop those skills that are so important to the long-term safety of a young person on the road.
Make sure to check out GetSmartAboutDrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.